I play defense against an actual sovereign nation state military. That's crazy. Do you realize how crazy that is?
It's truly nuts. Yeah.
That's totally crazy. What I do for a living is absolutely insane. Why is this even a thing? There used to be borders and like the actual military would defend you against foreign countries, but they don't.
Hey everybody, Tanner here with WAGMI Ventures. On today's episode, we have J.M. Porup, Chief Information Security Officer at Ava Labs. For anyone who's new, this is the WAGMI Ventures podcast, where we do snapshots with interesting builders and founders from across Web3. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. But for now, let's get into it with J.M. at Ava Labs. All right, hey everybody, I'm here today with J.M. Porup, CISO at Ava Labs, here in a personal capacity to talk about Web3 and security. JM, what's up? How you doing today?
You know, it's a Tuesday. What can I tell you?
Yep, I hear you. Well, it's going to be a good Tuesday to talk about Web3 and security. I'm really excited to chat. And, maybe just to start, if you could tell us a little bit about kind of your background with information security as a field, and maybe just how'd you end up in Web3 in general? Like, what's your kind of crypto story? Maybe we could start there.
Sure. I've been in cybersecurity for more than 20 years. I've worked as a developer, as a sysadmin, as a consultant, as a journalist for a while. Did a master's degree. I used to work for a different Web3 company before this one, and now I work for Ava Labs.
Perfect. So you're kind of the CISO's CISO with all those different hats in the space. I think my first question would be, how does the job of cybersecurity change in a Web 2 world versus a Web 3 world? Or are they similar enough to be kind of called similar problems, different, maybe different veneer, but same problems?
It's the same problem, only 1,000 times more difficult. Let me paint to you a pretty normal Web 2.0 cybersecurity problem space. You are a company, you're collecting PII, you're B2C, lots of e-commerce platforms out there. You've got 50 million social security numbers or credit card numbers, and your worst case scenario, your nightmare is a data breach. All of a sudden, a hacker breaks into your systems, copies all of those records of PII and dumps it on the internet. What happens next? Well, there's some bad PR, and maybe in 3 or 4 years, there'll be a regulatory slap on the wrist with a tiny fine. You're going to have a class action lawsuit where the claimants get $15.35 each. The CEO is going to get a bonus that year. Basically, nothing's going to happen. In Web 3, if North Korea hacks you and steals all of your money, then you're bankrupt. So, the difference is that, we're talking about the security of real money. I would say, the overused metaphor in Web 2 is that data is the new oil. I'm sure you've all heard that before. It's kind of trite and hackneyed and over. But if we accept that metaphor, which I think there's lots of caveats to be had there, but if data is the new oil, then crypto is the new gold. Well, it turns out that when you're sitting on a gigantic mountain of gold, people try to come and take it away from you. And when they take it away from you, you don't have it anymore. And that means the job of securing cryptocurrency at any level of the playing field, like I work for a layer 1, but if you're working for a crypto exchange, let's talk about Mt. Gox. We all remember Mt. Gox, or I hope we do, or the gazillion DeFi hacks over the last 24 months. That money's not coming back. The people who stole it, they're keeping it. You're bankrupt sometimes after one of these hacks, and that's a very different threat landscape to be working in compared to traditional Web 2.0 security.
Fascinating, yeah. So, in our email correspondence, kind of coordinating this chat, you had mentioned North Korea in that conversation too. And so it's one of the things I wanted to touch on to get more of a broader take on, can you give us a fuller perspective on what's happening there? I think the language you used was that there's kind of an all-out war from North Korea towards Web3. And I think it might be an interesting route to go down to learn a little bit more of what's actually happening there.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it an all-out war, but it is a war. And any conversation about Web 3.0 cybersecurity is incomplete without some discussion of North Korea. It is a matter of fact that the North Korean military attacks any company or individual they can and steals crypto whenever they can. They do so not for the money, but for the geopolitical power. What does North Korea want? North Korea wants to build or buy nuclear weapons. So North Korea is hacking crypto companies to buy crypto, to launder it, to purchase nuclear weapons parts. And the bottom line is this is a fact. And what makes this so different than, many other fields is that if you're dealing with a criminal in most parts of the world, you have access to the police, the FBI, Interpol, put out a red notice. But people in North Korea don't leave North Korea. How does that conversation go? Hello, Pyongyang Police Department. I'd like to file a complaint. You, as a sovereign nation state, your military stole some money from me. I want it back. How is that conversation?
Right.
What like you can grab, Russian hackers when they're on the beach in Greece or Turkey, but the North Korean hackers don't leave North Korea. They're, what are you going to do? And this is, and the U.S. government, the South Korean government, Interpol are aware of the issue and they're doing what they can. But to a large extent, North Korea can keep trying and they can get away with it. And they do get away with it.
Yeah, it's wild. I didn't realize, the extent to which it was such an issue and so kind of attributable to North Korea. So, a related question maybe is, or not related, sorry, slightly different question. I think I'm curious about, as you've been in the space, as things have evolved, how has security within Web3 evolved? Maybe first from a personal perspective, and then also given kind of your CISO roles, from an institutional or organizational perspective, how has thinking about security had to evolve as the hackers have evolved, as the types of hacks have evolved, et cetera?
Well, there is a certain amount of Darwinism involved here. The companies that get it and do cybersecurity well tend to survive. The ones that, YOLO into their new DeFi protocol without, proper due diligence tend to get wiped off the face of the earth. And I guess my sincerest hope is that new entrants to the market look at the, scattered corpses of previous failures and don't repeat those mistakes. I mean, it got to a point in 2022 where there were so many hacks. I had people tell me, we're not even writing about it anymore. Like, I don't have enough space in my infinite space blog for every single crypto hack. There's so many, My greatest fear is that, there's these new startups. Like I meet startups sometimes and I ask them, what's your cybersecurity plan in Web3? And they're like, cybersecurity? And it's just a massive facepalm moment, man. I'm just like, oh my God, please don't repeat history.
Yeah, it does seem like, there's kind of one narrative about, how bear markets kind of flood out certain actors. They kind of go out with the tide, right? But it does seem, maybe, I'm curious if you'd agree with this, it seems maybe like there also might be some kind of institutional knowledge or some awareness that like, hey, there's all these lessons from this kind of graveyard of these projects from this particular cycle that, I wonder about the continuity of those lessons from cycle to cycle, how that's being imparted, if people are really kind of taking seriously how dramatic certain episodes were for certain projects, et cetera.
Look, risk is just a hard thing. Human beings do not intuitively understand risk. If I tell you, Tanner, there's a bear behind you, it wants to eat you, you're going to run away. And you're not going to think about it deeply. You're going to be like, oh my God, there's a bear. It wants to eat me. I'm going to run or climb a tree or do something so it doesn't eat me. And this is something almost genetic because for, I don't know, hundreds of thousands or millions of years, bears ate people and we realized stay away from bears. But cybersecurity, it's this hand-wavy, invisible things are going to make you go bankrupt. Ooh, And it's hard for people to, especially less technical people, to fully wrap their minds around the severity of the risk, especially when you're operating in a highly volatile, high-risk business where there's like legitimate business and regulatory risks that also have legitimate claims on business leadership. Like you actually have to make money. If you go bankrupt because nobody uses your service, well, that's also an existential risk to your business. And who cares about North Korea? Like you actually have to have money to steal before somebody wants to steal it. But I mean, I just don't know, man. Like trying to help people broadly at scale across the entire Web3 vertical really understand the severity of the problem is frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, I can imagine. So related, you have this kind of great Twitter thread where you say the quote was basically any CISO who tells you they can prevent hacks is a fraud. That's like saying you can prevent cancer. You can't. You can only reduce the risk with diet, exercise, etc. And so as I was thinking about this, it was, I appreciated that's a very real, genuine take on being a CISO in Web3. And so I think my question was kind of multifaceted. It was one, can you expand on what you meant there and unpack two, maybe like what is the equivalent of diet and exercise for Web3 for any projects out there listening? Like what are the basics that they should be thinking about?
That is a really great question. Yeah, I would 100% double down on that tweet, and not just in Web3, but in Web2 as well. Like cybersecurity leadership is about risk management, not risk elimination. Like you would not go to your general counsel and say, promise me nobody ever sues us. I mean, any lawyer in their right mind would be like, are you insane?
Right.
Promise me the regulators never fine us. I mean, that would be, you go to your CFO, promise me no macroeconomic events are ever going to touch our company. I mean, the guy's going to be like, are you crazy?
Yep.
I once had a job interview many years ago where the guy was like, I'm hiring somebody to build a wall and keep the hackers out 100%. And I was like, okay, bye. Because that's not realistic. Like, I have a limited budget of money and time that belongs to my employer or whoever I work for. And my job is to serve them to keep that risk as low as possible to the risk tolerance of the CEO and board of directors, And I think that's the appropriate place for a CISO in any enterprise, not just Web3. It's about managing risk, not eliminating risk, because you hit this exponential, almost straight up vertical curve where I spend more and more money and get less and less return on my investment. I could spend every penny my employer has and never reach 100% security. And that doesn't serve my employer. They're a business. We're in a capitalist society. They're here to make money. My job is to support them to make money, whoever I work for. You know what I mean? So what are some basics Web3 companies can do? I don't have it in front of me, but there was the new RECT test that came out last week. It's inspired by the Joel test for good software development. And last week, a consortium of a bunch of very well-known security companies like Trail of Bits and others published a document. Let me see if I can pull it up while we're on this call, called the RECT test, REKT test. And it was like, these are the things that we think are like the bare minimum due diligence for a Web3 project. Here, I'm pulling up the Trail of Bits blog. I thought this was actually really good. Like, it's kind of dry. We don't need to drill into the details. I would encourage listeners to Google it, REKT, the RECT test. And it's like, this is some basic high-level things that you should be doing and you can do any of these 12 things in greater and greater detail and make them better and better. But you should be asking yourself, are you doing it at a bare minimum level of each of these 12 things? And if you're not, maybe you should take a step back before you, gung-ho further your business in the DeFi space.
Yep. Super interesting. I think that's a great resource too. I hope people check that out. So, moving forward here, you had a recent Substack post titled Living in a Fog. And you kind of, I think it would be a reiteration to kind of go into a ton of detail about it, of things you've already said here. But just this picture of a lot of anxiety and kind of the cybersecurity landscape being pretty riddled with uncertainty, right? My two favorite quotes were, one, it's like fighting Mike Tyson blindfolded. And then two, your strategy must even include the ability to take losses and even lose battles in order to win the war. And so I'm wondering if you could maybe elaborate on those thoughts kind of in context of what you've shared already about kind of how, there is some gravitas here. There are stakes. This is not a joke, that these risks are real. So in light of that, how would you kind of narrate that piece in those quotes?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, there are known risks in cybersecurity, and these are relatively easily addressable with money and time. But then there's I don't like sounding like a distant echo of Donald Rumsfeld, but, there's the known risks and the known unknown risks and the unknown risks.
Yep.
And, whatever you think about Donald Rumsfeld, these are relevant things to call out when you're I played defense against an actual sovereign nation state military. That's crazy. Do you realize
Yeah.
how crazy that is?
It's truly nuts. Yeah.
That's totally crazy. What I do for a living is absolutely insane. Why is this even a thing? Like,
Yeah.
there used to be borders, and like the actual military would defend you against foreign countries, but they don't.
Yeah.
So I have to, it's just insane, man. It's totally insane, but it's the way, like, we want to be sovereign individuals in Web3. Well, be your own bank. Being your sovereign individual means, like, you don't get the protection of the actual government. You know what I'm saying? And this
Yeah.
comes at a huge cost. So I'm just overwhelmed, man. Well, what was your question again? I forget.
I think you answered it. It was just kind of commenting on the gravity of the situation, kind of through the lens of those quotes from your piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like, from what you've shared so far, it sounds like maybe the biggest, practical issue here is not strictly that there's not technical ability to combat the hackers or defend the hackers, right? It sounds like, we haven't touched on the technical aspect too much, and I do have questions about that. Like, is it a technical problem? What am I trying to say here? I think my question is really, it sounds like just even mustering the will to take these things seriously and do what needs to be done, to even deploy technology we may already have, seems like almost the first battle for a CISO, right? And then second is, like, how do you actually defend, right? How do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I mean, the fundamental question in cybersecurity is not technical, it is financial. Security is a function of finance. Let me give you a really easy example to tell you what I mean. Let's say you own a famous painting worth $10 million. Are you going to spend $10 million to secure a painting worth $10 million? I mean, clearly this makes no sense,
No.
right? The amount of money you spend on security has to be proportionate to the thing that you're securing. And, make no mistake, good security is really expensive, really, really expensive. And so, you're the CEO, you've got your startup, and you're like, holy cow, that's a lot of money. Maybe I'll just accept the risk. Let's just roll the dice and see how we
Yep.
go. I'm sympathetic, because doing the right security stuff, like, especially the basics. I mean, let's not even talk about the advanced stuff. Like, if you don't do the basics first, your money is wasted on the advanced stuff. And, like, the road to minimum maturity in security is hard and it's expensive, but it's not rocket science. Like, any competent security person like me can tell you how to get there. But holy cow, is it going to cost you a lot of money?
Yep. That's really, I do appreciate the candor in this, because I do wonder if people may not know that idea, really. Just that, it's not like it's not a solvable problem. It's mostly just an expensive problem after a certain point, right? So I think that's actually really valuable, candid advice there. So I want to take a step back a little bit and just ask you, trend line for security in Web3. Are we getting better at all? Are people learning any lessons, or is it getting worse? 2022, I think it was Chainalysis that had said like 3.8 billion that they recorded last year, 2022 hacks from crypto. Who, I'm trusting that's accurate. It could be more, but it doesn't seem like we're getting much better. How are your feelings about the prospects of people eventually kind of getting it and thinking through these trade-offs you're discussing?
Yeah, I don't want to make any broad sweeping generalizations about industry in that regard. It's hard to say because, we're going through this deep and severe bear market, and that kind of clouds perception of existing business security practices. So the honest answer is I don't know. Look, I mean, there's more and more security practitioners gaining more and more experience in Web3. And I think, we're, things like the rec test, like, we're establishing, industry standard expectations. Like
Yep.
now we have the rec test. I would sincerely hope that an angel investor or a VC evaluating a startup would say, yo, startup co-founders, I got this rec test here from Trail of Bits. You guys, you gals doing this stuff?
Yep.
Like that's a step
Totally.
forward right there, right? So,
Yeah.
so I think, even though there's still a large population of companies and startups with bad security who are going to regret it, I think, we're beginning to establish common sense guardrails and expectations in industry like the rec test. And, I mean, sometimes it's two steps forward, one step back. But I see things like this as a positive development in our industry.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, maybe two last questions for you here, JM. First question is just kind of a recurring one I like to ask on the podcast. And it's, often for kind of a variety of different folks, whether they're founders or builders. I'm curious for you specifically as you kind of reflect on your work as a CISO, like if you could kind of, say you get a time machine, you can go back and kind of tell your earlier self any bits of wisdom. What advice would you want to impart to that earlier self about?
Buy Bitcoin.
Fair enough. Okay. Same.
I joke, but security-wise?
Yeah, security-wise.
Oh, nothing I can think of that I can talk about.
Okay, cool. JM, last question here. What's on your mind these days as you're thinking about, what's on your mind as you're thinking through what progressing and evolving with the space looks like? And for you personally, like what's the best way for people to kind of follow along on your journey as a CISO, kind of leading kind of some thinking in the Web3 space?
Well, look, I think that, security in the Web3 space is so more extreme than in the Web2 space that it's still kind of a bit of a Wild West, a bit of a frontier. Like we've been doing cybersecurity in Web2 for, almost 20 years now, and it's not perfect, but there's well-established norms. We are served by a wide variety of competing security vendors. And like, if your concern is the security of PII to meet regulatory requirements, there is a mature, very mature and highly competitive industry of security vendors who want your money. But the conversation I have with my security vendors, not all, but like 80% of my security vendors is your Web2 security product doesn't help me in Web3. And so, what that means to me is that, we are still very early days in terms of developing truly mature enterprise Web 3.0 security. And while it is very stressful and my anxiety levels can be quite high, it's also a good deal of fun because, man, I get to play for keeps against an actual foreign nation state.
Yep.
Most of my colleagues don't have that privilege. So, like it's real, man. When I go to work, I play for keeps. I play for real. Like this is the real deal. Like this is not training wheels time. This is the real deal. And I find that enormously satisfying as a security leader in a security profession.
Love it.
Naturally, I have to be very cautious about things I share publicly. And of course, I don't speak officially here for Ava Labs, but I do sometimes blog about this on my Substack or on Twitter.
Perfect. JM, thank you so much for the time. I know we could keep talking for a long time, but this is, I think it's a great kind of place to cap. Thank you for coming on the show, and I hope the rest of your week is great.
It's been a lot of fun, Tanner. Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right. Bye-bye.
Great.